Have you ever wondered why silence, seemingly just a brief pause, can become a poison that destroys an entire relationship? In anxious-avoidant dynamics, silence isn't merely distance, it's a sign of despair and surrender. Imagine this. After months or even years of decoding mixed signals and striving to prove your worth, one day you suddenly receive no messages, no calls, no apologies. That's not a tactic. It's a cold declaration. I can't do this anymore. The scariest moment isn't when the anxious partner begs, nor when fights erupt. The real disaster begins the instant the anxious person's silence becomes permanent. At first, the avoidant partner feels victorious, finally some space, finally a breather. But in moments, that illusion of peace turns into a nightmare. There's no one chasing anymore. No emotional safety, only emptiness and aching regret. They realized they weren't afraid of being smothered. They were afraid to face themselves and the loneliness they've always avoided. In this video, you'll discover 5 ways silence can destroy your relationship from the deceptive eye of the storm, calm through the labyrinth of misunderstandings, all the way to the collapse of trust. Each silent trapdoor will be exposed in detail, along with questions to ask yourself and immediate tips to help you recognize and break free from this toxic cycle. Watch through to the end to not only understand why silence is so dangerous, but also to grab your first step strategy for turning that silence into an opportunity for healing, whether you identify more with the anxious side or the avoidant side. Are you ready to embark on the journey of transforming your relationship? Let's begin. Method 1. Silence, the avoidance deceptive eye of the storm. When a relationship begins to fracture, the avoidant silence is not a gentle pause, but the deceptive eye of the storm amid a whirlwind of emotions. It looks like a peaceful moment at the peak of conflict, but it is in fact a refuge for restrained feelings, shyness, and unspeakable fear. At first, when words run dry and messages dwindle until they stop, the anxious partner reassures themselves that this is merely the space their partner needs, that they will reflect and return with explanations and the tender care that once felt so sweet. But in reality, that eye of the storm never lingers long enough to heal it, merely exposes the fragile shell of connection. The avoidant silence is not a sign of preserved love, but a tacit declaration that they no longer wish to share emotional space with you. From that moment on, every passing second of silence becomes a gentle but powerful drill, deepening the void in the anxious partner's heart. Their heart feels abandoned on a fragile beam, swaying between a nameless panic and a desperate attempt to cling to the last shred of hope in the hush. What's more frightening is that the avoidant, accustomed to controlling distance through silence, fails to notice or coolly ignores the silent panic they sow. They stare at the closed door and the invisible wall built between them and their partner and see a fortress of safety, while the anxious partner sees a barrier suffocating their breath, a bottomless chasm of solitude that they cannot cross. And so, the more the avoidant remains silent, the more the anxious partner's fear of abandonment intensifies, driving them to frantically search for clues, make one last phone call, send lengthy pleas for reconciliation and agonizing paradox. Each of these desperate attempts only fuels the avoidant's cold fire further, deepening the crack in their bond and convincing them they need yet more space. And the cycle of silence, panic, withdrawal spins ever faster, drilling ever deeper into a void that can never be filled. Method 2. When the buffer disappears, the avoidant is not abandoned but exposed. When the deceptive eye of the storm of silence begins to fade, we arrive at the second phase where truth can no longer be avoided. When the buffer disappears, the avoidant is not abandoned, but exposed. For so long, the anxious partner functioned as a safety net, ready to rush in and patch every emotional gap, extinguishing each wave of unrest that the avoidant partner forced into a corner. They were the soft cushion, proactively filling the cracks, offering comfort, and enduring until exhaustion. But when the anxious person chooses silence, no as a tactical pause, but as a deep, soul-weary resignation, all of that protective padding vanishes, leaving the avoidant partner utterly unshielded, forced to confront barefaced every fear and defense mechanism they had long concealed. Picture this scene. After days of endless pursuit, check-ins, explanations, and apologies. The anxious partner stops sending messages altogether. No more hints of forgiveness, no more fragile hope. This is not the customary silent treatment designed to create distance and then return with soothing words. It is the final verdict. I cannot go on like this. The instant this message materializes in the quiet, the avoidant loses the shell of safety they had relied on. The anxious no longer chases, but withdraws completely, leaving the avoidant stranded in an empty space where hidden fears suddenly erupt. For the first time, the avoidant realizes that distance and silence are no longer an effective shield. They once believed that by maintaining just enough distance, by remaining silent long enough, the anxious partner's intense emotions would eventually cool and they would be free to roam their inner world untroubled. But when the you who so faithfully comforted them for years willingly forgiving each rejection goes silent forever, the avoidant doesn't feel liberated. They feel frighteningly exposed. They are not abandoned. They are laid bare. The image they had of themselves, strong, independent, untouchable, crumbles into a person who is vulnerable, terrified, and at a loss for handling their own painful emotions. In that moment of panic, every psychological buffer the avoidant had meticulously built since childhood, from retreating at the first sign of conflict to swallowing the anxious partner's worried gaze as an inevitable burden shatters, they must look into their own silent mirror. Those vague tests, "Hey, hope you're okay," become gaunt leaves in a storm, insufficient to shelter or mend. Instead, they magnify the avoidant's confusion. The more they avoid, the deeper they sink into panic. The more they crave safety, yet have no idea where to seek it. Their unconscious defenses collapse one by one, exposing ghosts of memories, childhood loneliness, when first learning to navigate the world, wounds from past hurts whenever they opened up, and a core belief that love equals dependence, something they have always viewed as perilous. In their panic, the avoidant may resort to every trick to rebuild that lost cushion, possibly dating someone new immediately as a form of self-soothing, maybe burying themselves in work, diving into new projects or spontaneous trips, or pretending everything's fine on social media, sharing carefree, smiling photos. Yet these are only relics of the old avoidance machinery. They do not heal. They only obscure widening crack. Meanwhile, the anxious partner undergoes a completely different transformation, no longer fearing that the avoidant will leave because they once equated abandonment with the ultimate death. They experience a strange liberation when they choose silence and departure. It liberates them from the cycle of hopeless effort, from the role of constant comforter, and launches them onto a path of self-healing. Once the avoidant understands that the anxious person's silence is not a strategy but a declaration of surrender, they embark on a journey of self-confrontation. They learn to accept the pain they have caused, to sit with the emptiness they can no longer manipulate, and from there awaken their deepest longing, the yearning for a genuine connection, not to control or evade, but to truly feel, understand, and accompany. This is the pivotal turning point. When the final buffer falls away, the avoidant is at last exposed, and only then can the real healing story begin. And so, as the second storm subsides, both partners stand at the threshold of a new chapter, where genuine vulnerability, instead of mere distance, becomes the currency of real connection. Method 3, prolonged distance, from self-protection to self-punishment. As the psychological cushion from method 2 shatters, a new, deceptively gentle trend emerges. The avoidant initially revels in their reclaimed freedom, believing they have conquered constraint and regained control. They breathe deeply in the hush, viewing it as a transparent shield amid the storm, convinced they have triumphed. Yet after days, then weeks, even months of this freedom, the facade crumbles. Instead of a promised land, the space becomes an invisible prison. In the early moments, the avoidant imagines that silence and sustained distance will bring peace. They picture the anxious partner naturally returning, or at least sending a brief message of lingering care, but reality is harsher permanent. Silence is not a half-open door, but an iron gate shut tight, transforming distance into an infinite void that leaves the avoidant gasping in self-imposed solitude, a craving for connection, A yearning to be seen suddenly resurfaces in their chest, but they have no map for welcoming it. Meanwhile, the anxious partner undergoes an entirely different journey. Once the safety net, they now become the silent vessel of concealed pain. They tell themselves they must protect their own hearts, justifying their eternal quiet. Yet that silence does not safeguard. It deepens their wound. Every second passing in muteness is another stab to the weary heart. Unspoken anguish festers into a hard-to-detect scar until they realize they have invested trust, patience, and even tears into a relationship beyond repair. The tragic outcome is that neither side seizes the moment to course correct. The avoidant fails to perceive their own emotional crisis in time to narrow the gap, and the anxious never senses the avoidant's internal panic to proactively voice a desire to reconnect. Thus, the cycle of silence intensifies. The avoidant, suffocating in solitude, retreats further for self-protection, while the anxious drowns in helpless pain, punishing themselves for failing to hold on to their loved one. What was once a fractured relationship becomes irreparable, because both have missed the critical instant to face each other, synchronize their breaths, and speak their needs aloud. Silences stretch into deserts of mutual misunderstanding, where each person's self-protective walls become prisons, and the very defense mechanisms meant to keep them safe ensure they will never again find their way back to each other. When the prolonged distance has turned both partners into prisoners of their own walls, we arrive at method 4. Silence creates a maze of misunderstandings with no way out, where the silent space is no longer a calm curtain, but a labyrinth spiraling with suspicion, resentment, and mutual misinterpretation. In the absence of clear communication, each person's deepest needs are forgotten or misconstrued, and each constructs their own narrative about why the other has gone silent. For the anxious partner, receiving no signal at all from the avoidant quickly triggers self-blame. I must have done something wrong. I'm too much. Maybe I'm not worthy of love. Their mind becomes a stage for countless negative scenarios, first blaming themselves, then imagining unspoken accusations, and the more they chastise themselves, the deeper their suffering grows. Meanwhile, the avoidant partner, no matter how many tangled thoughts or secret yearnings they harbor, insists again and again, I'm fine. There's nothing more to say. I just need some space. They dare not open up to apologize for failing to meet their partner's needs, nor share their own feelings, for fear that vulnerability will spiral into loss of control and a fresh new entanglement. This mutual silence weaves a maze with no exit. Every time the anxious person asks, "Why won't you answer?" the avoidant brushes it off with a perfunctory reassurance, leaving the anxious partner more bewildered and terrified of abandonment than ever before. Each time the avoidant retreats into silence to protect themselves, the anxious partner interprets it as a harsh, final verdict on their worth. Thus, instead of seeking each other within the labyrinth, they become lost in their own assumptions and insecurities. Within this maze, not only is the opportunity for immediate healing lost, but both partners gradually lose the ability to recognize the language needed to escape their impasse. The anxious partner loses the courage to ask direct questions, while the avoidant forfeits the belief that apologizing and sharing feelings are not signs of failure. At that point, silence ceases to be a shield and transforms into an ill-fitting armor that blocks every path toward connection. The only way out is for one of them to summon the courage to tear down the wall of silence, reach out, and express the truths they have long feared to admit, the longing to be seen, to be understood, and to be forgiven. Only then can the maze become a corridor leading to truth, and trust have a chance to be rebuilt. Once both partners have confronted the maze of misunderstandings with no exit, and efforts to break down the wall of silence remain incomplete, we arrive at the final danger: loss of trust. When the empire of connection collapses, the pain of prolonged silence has sown deep seeds of doubt in the anxious partner's heart, while the avoidant partner retreats ever further, severing the very opportunities for shared growth. As silence endures, trust, the sacred bond that once convinced both people of their relationship's value, slowly becomes impossible to rebuild. First, consider the anxious partner. Every promise once made, every tender gesture now echoes only in memory, and those echoes grow more distant and unreal with time. They begin to close their heart, questioning every action and word from their partner. Do they even care anymore? Am I worthy of their time? Can I rely on any promise again? These questions not only plunge them into a profound loneliness, but also erase their faith in themselves. If even the person who once mirrored their worth no longer stands by them, are they themselves worthy of love? Each moment of doubt becomes a brick thrown against the wall of trust, shattering it beyond repair. On the avoidance side, prolonged silence once served as self-preservation, but now secretly wields a knife that severs any chance for mutual love. The more they curl into their shell of indifference and forsake their true feelings, the wider and more immeasurable the distance grows between them and the anxious partner. Although the anxious partner's trust has been shattered, the avoidant may not notice or simply doesn't care, because in their world, silence is proof that all bonds have been cut. They savor the false sense of security that comes with no longer facing responsibility, commitment, or emotional sharing. Yet, by isolating themselves so completely, they lose the opportunity to learn reliability, to be independent without loneliness, and to open their heart without feeling threatened. The wall they erected for self-protection becomes a prison that traps them, robbing them of the chance to err, to repair, and to grow. The collapse of trust is the most haunting loss of all. For the anxious partner, each attempt to reach out again is met only by the echo of doubt. Will it be different this time? When was the last time they actually meant it? And so they slam their heart closed, no longer brave enough to hear empty promises. For the avoidant, life in prolonged silence seems untouched, but they fail to realize they are isolating themselves from a wellspring of love that can flow only when trust is maintained. They don't see that sometimes a simple, "I'm sorry," or "I need you here," can stitch together the smallest cracks, laying the foundation for trust to heal and for love to be reborn. But when silence stretches on, those chances slip away, becoming the ghosts of words unsaid and hopes shattered beyond recovery. The empire of connection built on trust, sharing, and presence crumbles, leaving only the vast void of regret. The anxious partner may eventually find freedom in letting go, but often carries lasting scars. The avoidant partner, if they fail to awaken, drifts endlessly in their private world of quiet isolation, never grasping the true meaning of reliance and genuine connection. The cycle of silence loss, of trust collapse, of connection becomes the tragic finale of a relationship starved of openness and faith. Only if one of them summons the courage to accept responsibility, to place their trust in an apology and genuine sharing, can that empire be rebuilt, stronger from its ruins. Otherwise, silence will forever consume them both, and the once grand empire of their bond will remain a ruin of words left unsaid and hopes that can never rise again. Silence is never just a pause. In anxious, avoidant dynamics, it serves as a double-edged sword, both a shelter and a wound. From the deceptively calm eye of the storm of the avoidant, to the collapse of the safety cushion, the maze of misunderstandings, and finally the crumbling of trust, each stage carves a pit into which both the anxious and the avoidant can fall. When silence drags on, there's no room for immediate healing, no chance to adjust behavior in time, and rebuilding rock-solid trust becomes impossible. But don't let the story end there. Any relationship, no matter how battered, can find its way back if just one person summons the courage to break down the wall of silence. Start by turning the lens inward. Are you silent to protect yourself, or silent out of despair? Voice your needs in clear, specific terms, whether it's an apology, a confession of fear, or an invitation to work through things together. And if you tend to withdraw, try opening up just once, embracing the risk of vulnerability in exchange for the chance to be truly understood and trusted. The key lies in genuine communication and steadfast presence. Transform each moment of silence into a bridge, each minute of distance into an opportunity to reignite trust, and every challenge into a chance for both hearts to grow. Only by daring to step through the darkness of silence can you truly reach the light of lasting connection and authentic love. Step out of the silence and give your relationship a chance to heal. Start today.